See, we're on streaming on the secondary show. I'm doing a third program. We're on Spreaker right now. Spreaker is kind of unique because it jumps into YouTube and also goes on to iTunes, which Blog Talk does too. But since we're not on Blog Talk, we're adding other talk radio sites on, so this thing can happen pretty good for the 9/11 show that we were trying to put on today. Earlier, I was on Blog Talk Radio, and I had on the show, not Dr. Judy Wood, but I also had an affiliate of hers. His name is Andrew Johnson, and he's from England. And we were talking extensively about the forensic dealing with 9/11. And it got pretty interesting because we were talking about some of the things that were, not, I wouldn't say necessarily missed, but the things that, the factors that people kind of didn't, that was right before your eyes and you really didn't see it. Andrew is also a member of Scholars for 9/11, as I was. He's introduced to the group through Professor Fetcher, like I was, and he was one of the original members, like I was. So the thing was that we had a lot of information that we shared, making the show really, really interesting event, I could say. Now, the things that we talked about on this show had to deal with the forensic evidence of the building itself and how it went down and collapsed into its own frame. Both of us agreed and concluded on that show there's no way that jet fuel could have done that. And a number of people in the science community will also say that because it is totally impossible. It's totally impossible to powderize steel like that. It's totally impossible for planes to go in, and the weakest part of the plane's wings did not fall to the ground. Or any of the structural part of the plane did it show damage or anything to the building as it was going in. Instead, we see one building where there's a zigzag mark where nobody saw anything going into the building. The second one was a plane traveling at 500 miles an hour doing a circular movement into the towers and going through it like it was water. All of that was totally impossible unless it was something trickery with film or something. We went through the situation of Dr. Woods' theories, and we also talked, and I talked extensively about the fact that there was metal on the ground that turned into rust, which is not done by fire or a situation of the trade towers going down with two planes. The places where these items were turning into rust happened to be over by Building 7 and on the street. So therefore, how would Building 1 and 2 have anything to do with Building 7? And what caused the cars to flip over by Building 7? I had police officers and fire workers tell me this. So they're credible. And if you say that they're conspiracy nuts and they don't know what they're talking about, well, they're your fire department, your police department. They're the ones that stated this. And it's in full view, in color, and picture. The other thing, too, about 9/11 that is, astounding that I just saw today that just really blew me away was the woman that happened to be standing in the hole of Building 1, standing there, holding onto a piece of building. Now, if you go by the theory that the building was so hot, it was almost the heat of half the heat of the sun, which is totally hogwash for anybody to say. But anyway, if you look at this woman that's standing in the heels of the window of the World Trade Center, you will also question the, fact that how did she get there? How was she standing in the window of the towers? John was trying to talk about that because he saw it before I did. And it was so many pictures. It was just amazing. But the thing was, she was standing there in the actual rubble of the hole, holding onto a piece of the metal, which is supposed to have been hot from the burn, and she's holding onto it. And people could identify her through a picture. Question: what and who had all these cameras that were able to take all these prolific pictures? You know, who were these people that were able to aim in certain spots to get these extraordinary films that no one else had? Then there's the situation. I'm looking at the research 9/11, and there's one part of the building that's burning with orange-colored flame. That is kind of strange, too, to be honest with you. And then you see all of this particle dust coming out. It seems to me that it could have been a particle beam or something, cold fusion or some type of thing like that, more so than any jet fuel would have done that. And I'm just talking just on a logical basis of looking at what has been produced in films. Now, the thing that blew me away today was that Andrew had told me. I had talked to Rodriguez once, and he refused to talk to me again. Now, interesting enough, Rodriguez, who was the engineer for the World Trade Center, he had, talked about how these men had asked him for the blueprint of the building beforehand, and they were going to the bathrooms in each of the floors of the tower. Well, he told me every other floor. That's what he had explained to me. Why? That seemed kind of strange. Did he question them? No, but he allowed them in. He didn't even really report who these people were, but they allowed them into building and allowed them to go to these floors. Now, again, after 1993's heightened alert from terrorism, you would imagine that their security would be up. And anybody coming into the building, if they were asking to do that, they had to been told by some authority, Port Authority maybe, or where. How, why, and why were they told to go into the tower? And why were they monitoring the washrooms? The other thing was, I didn't know that Rodriguez had worked for a magician. Randy. You know who Randy is. Randy is the one that debunks most of the magicians out, saying and claiming that their magic acts are all phony. Now, how does a magician's aide end up in the towers working? I was also told that on this same broadcast, there was a situation that Andrew Johnson stated that Randy worked for one of the alphabet soup agencies, such as the CIA. Now, I found that interesting. Now, these magicians we see on television, they do illusions. And one of the biggest illusions that had been going on is Blaine. And you know what? In fact, when this happened with the 9/11 thing and the pictures I was looking at, I was thinking that this was some type of thing that they were doing. You know how some of these magicians have been vanishing buildings and vanishing different things, and you're watching it on television visually. Well, are we looking at something that was designed for us to look at and kind of appear as being something and it was something else? I don't know. But I'm just saying that the number of camera angles, the number of pictures that were out there, people are snapping pictures left and right, seems very odd. Nobody took any pictures of any objects hitting any of the other 4 buildings in the Trade Center. There was no pictures of Building 7 that I know of that shows what ran into that building. There's nothing showing what created or what came out of that big gigantic hole between Building 2 and 6. Absolutely no pictures whatsoever in regards to the logic of how a 747 class plane was able to go down as far down to the ground, 3 stories high, travel 500 miles an hour, and hit the Pentagon without any windshield shield to the outside of the plane. Now, normally when something's traveling that fast and it zooms down the airspace, it starts shaking. And when it starts shaking, parts of the plane start coming apart. But this situation that happened in Florida, the Pentagon, no such animal. And then also, when the plane goes that far to the ground, it starts rolling. It's a situation of the wind hitting the plane. So the logic of it being a plane and being able to dive out of airspace was totally, didn't make sense. Does not make any sense whatsoever. The other issue with Plainville and the plane that hit there. Everybody heard the report that there was a massive fight on the plane. People bravely stopped the plane from going into any buildings there. So anyway, how is it that that plane ended up making a big, gigantic, star-shaped hole in the ground? Like a plane's wings and a little hole in the middle and something else on the side. And absolutely no debris, no passenger seats, nothing. Another person I know, it was a cameraman at the Pentagon, told me that there was no seats, nothing that showed there was a plane outside the Pentagon. And he was there not too long after it happened. So again, we're looking at things that doesn't relate to being a plane, does not relate to being the regular thought process of airline fluid from a jet. In fact, the airline gas burns at a certain level. When you're talking the level we're talking about, that's going to powderize actual steel in a building. I mean, you saw it collapse. You saw the black soot that came out. That was steel. It wasn't molten steel. It wasn't like it was burned down to a level where it was turning into molten lead or anything. It just powderized. And like John was saying before everything kind of messed up here, the woman that was standing in the area of the wreckage of Building 1, she was holding onto the building. Therefore, it was not any heat. If it was as hot as they said, she would burn her hands, and she would not be standing. And then again, how did she make it there? If a plane flew there, that whole area would be still aflame. It would be still heat there. There would be carnage. How was she able to stand there and stand in the entrance so that people would see her? So, these are the falsehoods and some of the stories that we look at and we believe. Now, John, are you somewhere that you can come back up, or are you still unable to? Can you hear me? Not sure if he was able to hear me here. Let's see. John, are you there? Can you hear me? There he is. Oh, you okay? Or what happened? No, you can't right now. Like I told you, it was some kind of weird storm that popped up over here. And that was when I started mentioning the fact that they got a satellite that modifies the weather. As soon as I mentioned it, all of a sudden a hailstorm hit and the power went out. And it was just under suspicion to me. And that's, kind of how that happened. So I had to call back into the broadcast after that happened. So what do you think on that?